Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, 245%, the highest U.S. tariff that can be levied on Chinese goods. How did the White House arrive at the sky-high number? Details on a new fact sheet. Anxiety and concerns among Chinese exporters as orders from the U.S. dry up. What business owners told us about the developing situation.
Right now, it's not just a matter of changing tracks. It's a matter of life or death.
Hong Kong will stop shipping goods bound for the United States. That's in response to the new U.S. tariffs on China. And disturbing reports from China, the country's transplant industry is publicizing the transplant of infant organs into adult patients. The news floated to surface after a Taiwanese singer received a heart and liver transplant in China and now faces controversy. 245%, that's the new high for U.S. tariffs on certain Chinese imports. But the new figure isn't because of a reciprocal tariff hike. The White House published a fact sheet Tuesday explaining where the number comes from. Here's a breakdown. The U.S. tariffs on China now come in three categories. 20% imposed due to Beijing's failure to stem the flow of fentanyl from China to the U.S., 125% in reciprocal tariffs to target China's unfair trade practices, and a previously existing rule called Section 301, which dates back to the Biden administration. The rule can impose tariffs up ranging from around 7% to 100% on certain goods, including lithium-ion batteries and electric cars, meaning Chinese-made electric vehicles could face the full 245% tariff rate when entering the U.S. market. The Section 301 tariffs are duties intended as punishment and imposed on countries the U.S. deems are engaging in unfair trade practices. Meanwhile, President Trump says the ball is in China's court amid trade tensions. He's sending a message to China that Beijing should be the first to come to the negotiating table. That's because he says China needs the U.S. more than the U.S. needs China. Here's a readout of a statement by President Trump by the White House press secretary. Watch.
An additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money.
China recently retaliated with a 125% tariffs on U.S. goods after President Trump last week hiked his tariffs to China to 145%. While President Trump has been saying that he's willing to talk to China's Xi Jinping, no official communications between the two leaders have been reported just yet. Meanwhile, in a Truth Social post, President Trump criticized China for, quote, being brutal to American farmers, adding that they also backed out of a deal to buy more Boeing aircraft as part of its latest retaliation efforts.
Chinese exporters are under mounting pressure from U.S. tariffs. A marketing manager of a Chinese medical device firm says her company is in a life or death situation as U.S. orders vanish.
Right now, it's not just a matter of changing tracks. It's a matter of life or death. You could say that. Around 60 to 70% of our business is from American clients. So the pressure we're under is extremely high.
Lee's comments came during China's largest trade expo at her firm's booth. Most exporters that Reuters spoke to said U.S. orders they rely on have been delayed or stopped coming altogether. It marks a bad sign for China's reeling economy, where exports make up almost 20% of the GDP. No other country comes close to filling in that gap either, since the U.S. is China's top export destination. NTD spoke with several Chinese exporters. All of them said they are anxious about the situation. To protect their identities, we have distorted their voices.
No one can handle the hammer of U.S. tariffs. We're very anxious. No matter how hard the export business is, it's much easier than selling to domestic consumers. When you sell abroad, you can collect cash, but supply has exceeded demand in the domestic market, and people don't spend much money anymore.
The city of Yiwu is a top export hub in China. A factory owner there told NTD that U.S. orders are drying up.
We have to close our businesses. Those sharp business owners all know this. We're at our wits' end.
Adding to the blow, starting in early May, small parcels valued under $800 will no longer enjoy tariff exemptions. Instead, they face a 120% levy at U.S. Customs. The shift appears to target Chinese retailers like Shein and Temu, as that loophole was largely used as part of their business model for selling ultra-low-priced goods. Back to the Trade Expo, exporters say they're exploring new markets while waiting to see how the situation evolves.
Just like many of the suppliers we know are now shifting towards the Russian market, and of course, we're considering that too. Ultimately, it's about going global, tapping into the global market. Yes, the U.S. market is incredibly attractive, but we'll have to watch how things develop and gradually adapt.
Meanwhile, we're exploring new strategies, such as considering re-export trade or finding alternative ways to ship out our goods. The core issue we're facing is that goods cannot be exported and money cannot be collected. This is very severe.
Li said she's most worried about the potential for a stalemate between China and the U.S. In related news, Hong Kong will stop shipping goods bound for the United States. That's in response to the new U.S. tariffs on China. Here are the details.
Shipping goods from Hong Kong to the U.S. just got trickier. Hong Kong Post said Wednesday it has suspended sea mail to the U.S. and will halt airmail for goods starting April 27th due to U.S. tariffs. In a statement, it warned that sending items to the U.S. could mean facing exorbitant and unreasonable fees. Hong Kong Post added that it would, quote, definitely not collect any so-called tariffs on behalf of the U.S. It also cited the U.S. move to end the so-called de minimis exemption, which had allowed small packages to be sent free of import duties. Document-only mail will not be affected. Hong Kong, a special administrative region of China, faces the same tariffs as the rest of the country, according to a U.S. government notice. Once a free trading hub, Hong Kong lost its special U.S. status after China imposed a sweeping national security law in 2020.
The trade tensions between the United States and China have significant implications for Hong Kong. The Hang Seng Index made a significant drop, 2.47% on Wednesday. Xiao Bailong, a senior Beijing official in charge of Hong Kong affairs, claims the United States is undermining Hong Kong's prosperity, rule of law, and human rights. And the U.S.'s reciprocal tariff measures aim to, quote, take away our very survival. The comments come as the Chinese Communist Party has long faced criticism and accusations that it's eroding democracy in Hong Kong and violated human rights during the city's 2019 pro-democracy protests. The tariffs have prompted Hong Kong firms to reconsider certain strategies, with some exploring relocating their operations to countries like Mexico. That's to benefit from the USMCA tariff-free status. The American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong described the city as being caught between the U.S.-China trade war. Next, Chinese state-run media has recently been hyping up reports about a Taiwanese singer who received heart and liver transplants in China. The news soon sparked discussions overseas, including concerns about the source of the organs. Beijing has long faced accusations of forced organ harvesting. Meanwhile, a transplant journal published in 2023 reveals a disturbing new trend among Chinese doctors, the use of infant organs. NTD's Flora Hua brings us the story, and just a warning, some viewers may find the content disturbing.
Finding an organ match between a patient and a donor is very rare. Even more rare, finding matches for both a heart and a liver. According to Tank, a famous Taiwanese singer, he was able to secure those two transplants within a few months. Even more shockingly, both transplant organs came from the same person. The Chinese hospital responsible for the operations claims the donor suffered brain death.
The Chinese Communist Party's system is completely non-transparent. It is not open to the public. Only they themselves know what's going on internally. Yet they constantly use celebrities and various individuals to speak on their behalf. We all know that the CCP gives a unified explanation for all sources. For example, claiming they come from donors who suffered complete brain death due to trauma. They say whatever suits their needs, but there is no way for anyone to verify it.
Huang is a deputy chairman of the Taiwan International Care Association for Organ Transplants.
As for why he went to China, we are not that clear about it.
And there could be a far darker reality underneath the story. The Chinese hospital under the spotlight is affiliated with a state-owned university in southern China's Zhejiang province. Media reports accuse the hospital of taking part in the Chinese regime's forced organ harvesting, the practice of forcibly removing organs from an unwilling donor, often while they're still alive. And according to an investigative organization, one faith group makes up the vast majority of the Chinese Communist regime's forced organ transplant pool, Falun Gong practitioners. The hospital's deputy head, Chen Jingyu, wrote on social media that he conducted 370 lung transplant surgeries in 2023 alone. That's more than once a day. Patients in the U.S. often spend years on the transplant waiting list. Many die while waiting. Back to the Taiwanese singer's case. The chief surgeon, Dong Ai-chiang, is blacklisted by a human rights organization for his alleged involvement in Beijing's forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience. But the situation gets worse. China's transplant industry has expanded its transplant pool to include infants. Some contacts in the U.S. child organ donation helps save the lives of children on the transplant waitlist. This is because the size of an organ matters during transplantation, so very young patients require donating organs from young donors. According to the U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration, there were more than 110 child organ donors under 1 year old in 2024. However, this is not the reason behind the trend in China. Chinese doctors published a journal in 2023 in the American Journal of Transplantation. The article discussed cases of transplanting infant kidneys into adult patients. The infants ranged from just 1 to 3 days old. On the Chinese version of TikTok, a doctor openly praises the effectiveness of infant transplants. All of them claim the operations were done after the infant's death, adding the obtained parental consent. China Affairs commentator Tang Jingyuan, who was a practicing doctor in China, says those accounts are hard to believe.
The approval process for organ transplants from newborns is actually very complex. First of all, there must be a formal medical determination that meets the national legal standards for death, confirming that the infant is indeed in a state of death. Only then can you move on to the second step. The second step, without question, requires the full consent of the parents or legal guardians, and this must be fully informed consent. Additionally, it also requires strict approval from an ethics committee. However, in most cases, by the time a newborn goes through all the necessary rescue procedures properly, organs like the liver or kidneys are generally no longer viable for transplant.
Taiwanese doctor Yang Weijie echoed Tang's views, saying if doctors attempted all means to save the infants' lives and still failed, the timeline would exceed the time organs remain suitable for transplants. Yang has extensive experience caring for prematurely born babies. Several U.S. states have passed laws banning their residents from going to China for organ transplants. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Coming up, dozens of countries are now lining up to negotiate with the U.S. on trade. Japan, one of Washington's major allies in countering China, is meeting with the U.S. Wednesday. Meanwhile, Beijing is building up its retaliation plans. Now it seeks to pit Europe against America. A look at one country that Beijing may have just hooked for the strategy. And China has tightened export controls on some rare earth metals, materials key to making devices from iPhones to weapons. How could the move impact U.S. defense technology?
So regardless of where you see metals produced, they're put on a ship, they go to China to be refined, and China controls the supply chain for them. That's a huge national security risk.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Dozens of countries have reached out to the U.S. to negotiate on trade. Japan is among the first, and it's meeting with President Trump Wednesday. Trump posted on Truth Social, writing, quote, Japan is coming in today to negotiate tariffs, the cost of military support, and trade fairness. The negotiations will cover possible energy projects and Japan's support for hosting the largest U.S. military presence overseas. Before departing for the U.S., Japan's Minister of Economics said he hopes to reach a fair deal without tariffs. This comes as the U.S. imposed a 24% duty on imports from Japan. While reciprocal tariffs have been paused for 90 days, a 10% baseline tariff is still imposed on most countries, as well as a 25% tariff on all automobile imports. That's a major concern for Japan's economy, which relies on exports. Aside from tariffs, the U.S. Treasury Secretary wants to discuss exchange rates, but Japan's pushing to delay those talks to a later date. Japan's Prime Minister said on Monday that Japan doesn't intend on rushing a deal or making large negotiations early on. Looking ahead, the Italian Prime Minister plans to negotiate with Trump on Thursday about the tariffs imposed on the European Union. The trade war is on between the U.S. and China, and Beijing builds up its retaliation plans. The regime is seeking to pit the European Union against Washington. What's China's plan to overcome its own huge gaps in tensions with Europe? Let's dive in. President Trump described China as a hostile trading nation and used the phrase trade war with China in some of his latest posts on Truth Social on Tuesday. That's as Beijing uses terms like bullying in its efforts to divide the U.S. from its trading partners. Meanwhile, China is actively seeking to invite the European Union to collaborate in opposing the U.S. And it seems China already has its first partner from the Western world. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said on Monday that China, together with Spain, would defend so-called multilateralism. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez visited China last week. During the visit, Sanchez stressed that Spain is willing to join hands with China to cope with global challenges. The two sides issued the Joint Action Plan for strengthening the comprehensive strategic partnership. It targets trade, investment, new energy, artificial intelligence, and the digital economy. Spain may also act as a broker for China-EU relations. Beijing has tried to position itself as a potential partner to the EU, urging cooperation with China and distance from the U.S. At the same time, the EU is diversifying its trade partners to reduce dependence on the U.S. But there are trade tensions between the EU and China as well, including disputes over subsidies and overcapacity and other issues. The EU imposed tariffs up to 35.5% on Chinese-made electric vehicles due to concerns about state-backed subsidies and unfair competition. In response, China and the EU have started discussions on setting minimum prices for Chinese EVs as an alternative to tariffs. China has slapped export restrictions on 7 rare earth metals and magnets. That's to retaliate against U.S. tariffs. Now, a report from think tank CSIS says China's move could harm U.S. military capabilities. We tap David Blackman for his insight. He's an energy policy analyst and consultant and a 40-year veteran of the oil and gas industry. David, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, to begin, what do you make of the CSIS warning here that Beijing's withholding of those rare earth minerals could threaten Washington's war footing?
Well, I think it's entirely accurate. This is a known problem for years now, going back at least 30 years. We don't produce these kinds of minerals in our country now. We don't mine for them, even though we have large known deposits around the country. We kind of got out of the mining business. It was a conscious decision during the 70s and 80s and farmed it all out to China and other developing nations. And so we don't produce them here. We don't refine and process them here. And that's really the most critical thing I think the Trump administration is going to find in its study is that we have no capability to refine these metals into usable products once they're mined. That's all done in China now. So regardless of where you see metals produced, they're put on a ship, they go to China to be refined, and China controls the supply chain for them. That's a huge national security risk. President Biden actually made a major speech on it in July of 2021, committed his government to a whole of government effort to onshore these supply chains. And he really didn't accomplish much in that regard. And so now the Trump administration has inherited it, and it's become, as you mentioned, a pretty significant issue now.
Expanding on that, when it comes to mining and refining, it does seem President Trump has begun taking actions to increase American mineral production to counter Beijing's monopoly of the sector. But given China's control of the sector, what feasible options does the U.S. have in terms of mining and refining?
Well, in terms of refining, I suspect we will see the president, after this study is done, declare a national emergency and invoke the Defense Production Act to kind of fast track the production or the creation of a refining capability here in the United States, just as he did during the COVID crisis. You know, he invoked the Defense Production Act to encourage the rapid manufacturing of masks and other protective gear that we all thought we needed in that pandemic. And so that's going to happen, because it doesn't matter if you can get the mineral supply if you can't refine it. And that's going to be the central issue on this. And it's of course, you know, I think obtaining a supply of it is a big piece of why President Trump has been so focused on Greenland, because the largest known single deposit of rare earth minerals is on the southwestern coast of Greenland. And there is actually a mine there ready to go if it can be, as soon as the Greenland government decides to lift restrictions on its activity. So I think that's a big motivator where Greenland's concerned, but you're always going to have this problem of you can't just put it on a ship to China if you want to free your supply chain from China.
Now, another angle seems to be the Democratic Republic of the Congo. While China currently owns or controls the vast majority of the Congo mines there, the cobalt mines there, the Congo government has reached out to the U.S. for help in countering rebel forces in the region. That's as the country has about $20 trillion worth of resources, including rare earths, according to the Congo-based Ponzi Foundation. Now, Trump's Africa envoy has laid the groundwork for such a deal there. What would that mean for the U.S.-China competition over rare earths?
Well, I'm not sure what it would mean for rare earths. They do have known deposits there. I'm not sure there are active mining operations for those rare earths there in Congo. I haven't studied that issue in depth. I mean, if there are active mines that China doesn't control, then obviously the U.S. could potentially make a deal related to those in exchange for military and aid support for their government's needs. And that could be another, ready solution, at least to the supply piece of the thing.
David Blackman, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.